Well, greetings all. Joseph Kursky here on the Esri Education Industry team. And I'm joined by my colleague, Brian Baldwin, who's over in, he's that way of me. He's over in Boston. And Laura Bowden's in California somewhere, Southern California. And we are glad that you're here with us in the People Mapping Workshop. This is going to be, I hope, and trust that this will be extremely relevant, not just because we had the 2020 census in the USA, but because these data sets are at your fingertips, they're easy to use, and you can get to the analysis stage more quickly and more readily than ever before in the past. And we'll also touch on global demographic data as well. So we are here at your service. If there's anything we can do to help you in your education journey, that is what my team and I we've dedicated our careers to. We love working with all of you and appreciate your attendance here today at the workshop and also at the Education Summit. So this is our contact information for Brian and I. Laura is also searchable and findable. And we have a landing page that you can see right there for the education team. It is all about teaching, research, curriculum development, facilities management on campuses, and spanning from K-12, university, technical, community, tribal colleges, libraries, museums, wherever there's education happening, we want to be able to support and encourage and do whatever we can to help you be successful. Here's my own pathway, and I share this because not to bore you to tears, but I want to focus on that upper left panel there. This is part of why I love teaching population, because I used to work at the Census Bureau as a geographer. And at the time, that I was there, we were building the Tiger system, which of course was the first nationwide street addressing system. No, it wasn't invented by Google in 2005. It was actually encoded by a fleet of people working around the clock to encode all those address ranges so that we could do all the wonderful things we can do today with geo-enabled data sets with demographic information. So I love this. Even if I hadn't worked at the Census Bureau, I'd love this for many reasons that we'll talk about right here. So our goals for our workshop today, folks, and by the way, this is the story maps, as you can see. So I'm going to put this in the chat box so that people can access it later. One of the things that I wanted to mention here is that we put in more content in this story map than we're going to be able to cover in the next 43 minutes, okay? It is designed that way so that you can actually dig deeper. I'm going to touch on some highlights of this content, but again, there's more content that you can actually use in the future after the workshop ends. So how can I find the population and demographics, spatial and attribute data? How can I use it inside ArcGIS Pro, ArcGIS Online, and other Esri tools? And what kinds of investigations can I foster using these amazing data sets and tools? And then, okay, I want to dig deeper. Where do I go to learn more? So those are our 4 goals, our noble goals that we'll set out. Now, here's a couple of reasons why I love teaching with population data, just to sort of set the stage here. We talked about this a bit ago in the preliminary comments leading up to our workshop, but it's relevant to 21st century issues, right? So many things in our world have to do with human imprint on the landscape, and we can analyze that imprint and that impact, how the environment impacts people, how people impact the environment, both ways, human environment interaction with these data sets. So it's at the intersection of the humans and environment. It all fosters all the things that you and I love about teaching with geospatial technologies: critical thinking, spatial thinking, problem solving, geoliteracy, and it's accessible. You've got a variety of tools, as you can see there, that you can use that access demographic data. And indeed, Business Analyst Web, for example, actually has the data bundled up inside the tool. So you don't actually have to go searching outside the tool to find it. We'll talk more about that in a bit. With ArcGIS Pro, sure, it's an install, but it's connected to the web, ideally. You'd actually be connected to your ArcGIS Online account when you're using Pro. Why would you use Pro instead of ArcGIS Online and most of these other things that are listed here? Well, to dig deeper, to do more rigorous analysis. We'll talk more about that too. But I also love this part. Allows and encourages, what if we look at this variable instead of that variable? What if we looked at this region of the world instead of that region of the world? So the what if questions. There are admittedly other tools that you can use in instruction and in research that allows you to do that. But I think geospatial technology, especially enabled by these servers, portals, ArcGIS hubs, open data portals, et cetera, that allow us to access data at our fingertips, it allows us to ask those what if questions. And that's what inquiry is all about. And most importantly, it fosters your students that graduate and become change agents. And indeed, I would argue that your students are already change agents. We've seen a lot of evidence of that yesterday. While they're still students, even in primary and secondary school, and even in technical tribal community colleges and universities, while they're still students, they are change. They can be and they are change agents in their own on their own campus and in their community, but much more so beyond as they graduate and go out into the workforce and become the change agents in government, industry, academia, et cetera. And I would just argue also that when we're teaching with geospatial technology, we're teaching these three legs of this geoliteracy stool, if you will. Content knowledge, in our case, population, demographics, characteristics, human behavior. Skills, presenting, communicating, spatial analysis, spatial statistics, et cetera. And finally, the geographic perspective, which I think is important even if you're teaching business or history or government studies or data science or health. You're teaching with the geographic perspective. Here are some selected tools at the bottom of this screen that you can see here. ArcGIS Urban, ArcGIS Insights, Business Analyst Web, and ArcGIS Online. They're all SaaS-based. They're all software as a service, running in the cloud, nothing to install. ArcGIS Pro with the R Bridge, which is, I think, extremely suitable for population studies, is, again, something that you probably already have at your fingertips on your campus. And if not, our team can help you get there. But your brain is the most important thing. More about that in a moment. This is all part of the ArcGIS system. That's what's nice about these tools is they're all connected, actually. They're not just some tool that Brian or Joseph or Laura invented and it's in their garage somewhere on some little server. It's actually connected to the wider ArcGIS system, which gives you a lot of power because you can connect these tools together. But most importantly, I love this photo. I took this at an actual high school in Colorado where I was running a geotech club after school. It is now a doorstop, but as you can see, it is an old Mac computer that was once part of someone's valued part of their IT stack. Now it's a doorstop. So the point is here, don't get too attached to the tools. The tools will evolve. The tools will change. This tool is the most important tool, right? It's not, can I make a bivariate map? Is what do I want to find out? So you're nurturing this whole spatially enabled thinking brain of yours and your students. That to me is the most important thing. And on a related note, Laura, Brian, and I and others on our team get people saying, hey, I put my data on the map. Great, we'll say. And we always want to encourage the and that is, what does it help you do now that you understand this spatial relationship, perhaps? And now that you've got your data on the map, what does that lead you to do in terms of further analysis, action, further questions, et cetera? Now, here are some selected topics that we're going to dig into today, as you can see right here, all having to do with population. And I'm going to frame it in basically 11 different activities. We're not going to be able to go into depth in all of 11 activities, but you've got in the chat box there the story map that actually has links to all of these activities. First of all, when I was at all those federal agencies in my past career, USGS, NOAA, Census Bureau, I always dreamed of, I know this sounds a little bit geeky and nerdy, but a sort of a one-stop. We had geospatial one-stop, we have data.gov, and they're all, noble efforts, and they still exist. But having the Living Atlas that's enabled and part of this ArcGIS system, I think is a huge leap forward because you've got the ability to now go and find and be critically evaluating the data that you find, right? Not just accept it just because it's online or just because it's a map, but actually being critical of it. More about that in a moment. But then being able to ingest that into these tools that we talked about earlier. So the Living Atlas of the World is a great starting point for demographic data. So one of the things that's in there is the popular demographics for the USA layer that comes from the American Community Survey, and as we speak, the 2020 decennial census data is being populated. More about that in a moment as well. But I would start with the Living Atlas of the World if you're searching for demographic data. The second one I wanted to go into with you all is these indicators of the planet. This is part of ArcGIS Online Living Atlas of the World apps. The apps include the Wayback Imagery, which we'll talk about today, It includes the water balance app and a small set, but incredibly useful apps. This one I love using as an intro to get students thinking about issues on our planet week to week. So, first thing Monday morning in a class, show this. Have the students dig into these little tiles, which is actually, as you can see in the upper left, using the experience builder, which is another tool that's very intriguing, but digging into some of the population related issues. And many of them have to do with population, right? The human interaction with the environment for wildfires. How much do humans exacerbate the naturally occurring wildfire situation, et cetera? So in each one of these tiles, you can go into the Living Atlas of the world. You've got a live interactive web map or more, and you've got the data at your fingertips. So I would highly encourage you to use these. This is extremely, some of them are pretty grim, understandably. These are serious problems, but I really think this is a good thing to show as an icebreaker to get students thinking spatially and about 21st century issues. I could go on, but I won't. Okay, let's use number 3 now. Investigate incoming and outgoing migration with a series of, and also demographic information with a series of 3D globes. Sometimes that 3D effect is very engaging, very intriguing, and we have the 3D scene viewer, for example, in ArcGIS Online that allows you and your students to actually dig into this. You can build a 3D scene, and you can also use 3D scenes that are already built, which I will show right now. One of them is this one. So here is the incoming and outgoing migration according to the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, right? It's really important to analyze and to study where the data comes from, how often is it updated, who created it, how often is it curated, the scale it was created at, and so on and so forth. But here you've got the ability in a 2D mode and also in a 3D mode to look at, as you can see along the bottom here, this is a web mapping application built on population data from the UN. 1990, 2000, 2010, and you can see how things change, not only the raw numbers, but the thickness of the line. And the way that this is cartographically represented, I think, is really intriguing with the dark gray base map that probably many of you are familiar with, and these orange lines showing the strength of incoming and outgoing migration for all of the countries in that particular data set. So why is this so much, why is there so, I taught in the UAE, taught some GIS there for about 3 weeks, and it was fascinating to see how many people, as you probably well know, are from another country, right? Very few natives in GIS and education right there, and in education in general. Most of them have moved there from elsewhere. So how does that compare with another place around the world? How do we know that, for example, Australia, you got 1990, let's look at inbound. So you can see 1990, 2000, let's pan over to here so we can see that, wow, there's a little bit more as time goes on from Southeast Asia and South Asia moving to Australia. And sometimes the 2D mode is just as effective or even more so than the 3D mode. So you've got this amazing data at your fingertips. Again, be critical of the source, but really quite fascinating. And then, of course, we don't just show these tools. It's what's where, why is it there, and why should we care? Why do we care if migration changes around the world? And how does Somalia compare to Australia? Why are there so few moving to Somalia and so many moving away? And how bad would it have to be in your country, challenge-wise, for you to actually move away? Do you have the means to move away? So getting students to think about the world in, it's not so simple as it seems. If conditions are challenging in a country, it's not that everybody can leave or should leave or wants to leave. So all kinds of issues in discussion that you can have with this particular part of the Cool Maps gallery. Cool Maps. What's not to love about that? And there are others in the Cool Maps gallery that you might want to check out, but that's my favorite one in terms of demographics. There's also a couple of 3D globes that are my favorites from one of our developers at Esri Zurich. And one of them that she's developed is this one. And I've got a link in there in the story map, but I like the fact that it's a good illustration for what GIS is. So in other words, every one of these extruded polygons has a value, and it's not just a graphic floating around in cyberspace, right? It has a value, as you can see in the lower left as I pan around these, and also change over space and time. So you've got 2000, 2005, and you can see the urban areas the densely populated areas getting larger as I pan from 2000 to 2020. Again, according to a certain data set, but looking at, for example, why there's a settlement of Australia the way it is. Why are most people living on the East Coast? Fascinating to be able to do this, and the density of these polygons compared to these polygons. I mean, it's like night and day. Okay, so the point is, these tools can be a 5-minute lesson. They can be a deeper dive. Your choice. You want to use it in the way that's most appropriate to your curriculum. So I've got other ones in there. There's one that's filterable. So you can filter it and only show the more densely populated, in this case, 110 by 110 kilometer cells, grid cells. Okay, hope this is intriguing for you folks. I just love this. There's so many ways to get into this. And depending on the age of your students, the experience they've had with GIS, the background that they've had, et cetera, there could be lots of different pathways here. There's no one way to do this, and that's why I'm presenting some key resources here for you. One of the things that I like to incorporate with population studies is imagery. And some of you know about the Wayback Imagery. It allows you, through literally terabyte loads of high resolution imagery, to compare, okay, not back to the Landsat era, 1970s, but over the last 7 years or so at high resolution, changes over space and time. So here with the Wayback Imagery, if I go ahead in the upper left here and click the swipe tool, I've got, okay, the bell's ringing in 5 minutes, or my students are arriving in 5 minutes, and I've got to have something ready to go. Well, I've got the textbook example of urban sprawl, suburban Southwest Las Vegas, Nevada. So I look at this and say, okay, there's been a lot of changes just between 2014 on the right and 2021 on the left. Then if I change the scale and I pan a little bit over to Lake Mead, for example, which probably most of you know that it's actually a reservoir. And I look at this swipe tool and I say, okay, what's wrong with this picture? The lake level has drastically declined in just 7 years due to ongoing drought in the Southwest. Okay, and if major urban areas such as Las Vegas are getting their water supply from such surface sources, there's not enough groundwater to sustain that population. What's wrong with this picture? What should we do about it? Why is this an issue? So in one tool, you've got the ability to teach about deforestation. You can look at reforestation. You can look at glacial retreat. You can look at coastal erosion, agricultural expansion in Saudi Arabia or in central plains of the US. Lots of different issues, construction of reservoirs at your fingertips. And if you want to dig deeper, you can sign in to your ArcGIS Online account and bring these layers into ArcGIS Online. So then you could add things like population density, land use, zoning, and so on, river systems. Okay. So that is the Wayback Imagery. There's a couple of others here that I don't have time in the workshop to dig into, but the Landsat lens kind of gives you the same tools at your fingertips, but with Landsat data. And as you probably are aware, Landsat data goes even further back in time. So we're talking the 1970s. We're talking the Bee Gees. Oh, that was a band. Okay. Anyway, the point is you've got 50 years of Landsat data. Actually, yeah, about 50 years worth of Landsat data. Just about. In a couple of years, it'll be 50 years. But the point is you've got that data at lower resolution, but still global in coverage and farther back in time. Nice. Okay. Lastly, well, second last, the Topo Map Explorer. Now, this is unlike the Wayback Imagery and the Landsat Lens Viewer. The Topo Map Explorer is USGS, so it's just USA. But you've got, in that case, historical USGS topo maps going back to the 1930s at your fingertips. Now, many of you probably have a whole stack of USGS maps. I've got one of this particular area behind me here in Western Colorado. But okay, those are still good to have around. But you don't have to have a big, pile of these in your house anymore. Don't get rid of those. But this tool right here allows you to add historical topo maps for, again, it's just USA in this case, but going back in time and using tools to make them transparent. And just like the Wayback Imagery, you can then bring them into ArcGIS Online for further analysis with other layers on top, such as ecoregions or biomes or river systems. Fascinating to be able to do that. So you've got almost 100 years change over space and time, and tie it to population change. Why is this community, my community, Denver, Colorado, fast growing, rapidly urbanizing. Why is that different from, I look at St. Francis, Kansas in Northwest Kansas. Why is St. Francis pretty much looking the same now as it did in 1930? Why? The whys of where. Okay. And then finally, the Landsat Explorer app is, I think, fascinating. So here you've got swipe capabilities, you've got multi-band capabilities. Unlike the Landsat lens, in the Explorer one, you can look at near infrared, for example, look at vegetation health and so on. Lots of other things. There's all kinds of fascinating maps. I'm going to dive outside of the Esri ecosystem here for just one moment. But even static maps have their use, I contend, in education. So, for example, this one, which is a state-by-state migration map from New York Times, using some of the same data that we're talking about, but being able to, if we drill down into here, looking at each state in the US and how many people in 2010 lived there that also lived there in 2000. Now, we'll be updating this in a year. I'm sure they will be. But the point is, you can see Pennsylvania, 74% of the people lived there in 2010, and that were actually living there in 2000 as well. And you can see other states lower, like Nevada, right? More people, and here in Colorado, migrating to it. So you've got a lower percentage of people that were there 10 years ago. Fascinating to be able to do this. And these little cells around each state is indicating how many people have moved there from other places. I just love this stuff. I wish I could get excited about it. Okay, now we're starting to get into the real heart of the matter here with some deeper dives. Examining world population and demographics by country. Again, how do I get that data? A lot of it comes from the Living Atlas of the World from various sources, UN, Department of Economic and Social Affairs, various statistical agencies around the country. We actually have at Esri a set of demographic staff. We have demographers. Some of you know Linda Peters, for example, and other really brilliant, smart people like her. Anyway, the point is, they were hired in part because of their deep experience with working with different countries' statistical data and bringing it into this platform. And I just absolutely love looking at these population estimates, global population and maternal health indicators, GDP, some of which comes from the World Bank, some of it comes from other sources. But if it's in the Living Atlas, it's got metadata in it. Okay. And it helps you to evaluate whether or not that data is suitable for your course. And I also would encourage you to have the students examine that metadata, because that'll cultivate them doing that as they journey forward in not just in GIS, but in all areas where they're looking at data, right? They're just going to be looking at data no matter what profession they go into and no matter what field they go into. So getting them into the habit of really questioning, where did the data come from? I know it's intriguing looking and it's got some nice symbology, but can I trust it? And is it suitable for my needs? Absolutely. So more about that in a moment as well. But let's just take a look at one of these layers in here. I'm going to go ahead and take a look at this one, country population estimates. And again, I've got the ability to open this up in ArcGIS Pro. In this case, we're going to just open it up in ArcGIS Online. When do you use Pro versus ArcGIS Online? Well, you've got choices even in ArcGIS Online, and my colleague Kylie Donia and I are teaching a workshop in the new Map Viewer versus the Map Viewer Classic here in about 3 hours. But you've got this capability as well in these data feature services. This is a feature layer. You can open it in ArcGIS Pro right from here. I'm going to open it up in the new Map Viewer in ArcGIS Online right now. And here I've got, well, okay, I just passed it by, but that metadata screen is worth spending a little bit of time on. You don't have to spend a whole class period on it, but being able to do this. And here we've got, okay, it's a little bit old, but I've got, just as an example, these country population estimates, and I can go to these layers and see, oh gosh, I can change the symbology, I can look around, I can sign in, and then being able to open up the table, add additional layers to it, and so on. I love these new pop-ups in the new Map Viewer, by the way. You get a lot more rich information behind these, some of which are time-enabled, which is really fascinating to me. So I highly recommend tapping into, I'm going to close a couple tabs just to maintain sanity and to save on bandwidth. Okay. One of the things that you probably do as well, but I would just highly encourage you to do, if you're not, is to follow certain groups, certain organizations, certain people, cartography. For me, it's Burns Sokolsky, John Nelson, Aileen Buckley, and others, inside and outside Esri. But organizations. One of the organizations that I think is worth actually following and checking up on what they're doing is CSEN, the Center for Earth Science Information at Columbia University. They've been longtime friends and colleagues of ours. And one of the tools that they've built in conjunction with some of the tools that I was just showing earlier is this CDAC population estimator. One of the fascinating things about population studies, as I think many of you know, is the ability to incorporate population pyramids. It's one of those long-standing fascinating things to be able to do. And if I, for example, click on a point on the map, I'm going to be able to drill down and get some information about that point. So for example, I can buffer with this tool. Look, it's based on some of the Esri technology, but it's a CSEN enhanced from Columbia University data set. So I'm going to draw a shape in a certain part of the world, and it's going to return. This is I think the harbinger of the future. In fact, the future is now with geospatial technology, where you're querying a data set and you're going to get information back from it, sometimes in real time, wildfires, stream flow, traffic, sometimes in near real time, and sometimes it's a static data set, but nevertheless could be a very intriguing tool. So for example, here I've got, okay, population trends for this part of the world that I've banded an area around. And then, touching on what I was mentioning a moment ago, you've got the population pyramid for that area that it's actually constructing here on the fly, which is why it's taking a few moments. But being able to look at, okay, Japan's population pyramid, right, like this, where you've got a lot of people in the senior years and relatively the same amount over down here with the young folks, as opposed to Ghana or another part of the world that's changing quickly, and they've got a lot of kids. So the base of the population pyramid is like this. We'll come back to that in a moment as it generates. But fascinating to be able to do that. Here we go. But look at this. And then you've got change over time. So some of these tools actually let you look at the 2000, 2010, 2019, 2020-ish population pyramid. But being able to do that and compare that now to Italy, or compare that now to Japan, or Canada, or USA, et cetera. Fascinating to be able to do that. And some of these tools will let you export the data into a CSV that you can then bring into ArcGIS Online, right? This is an application, so you can't like put this map into ArcGIS Online. It's built on top of some of that Esri infrastructure, but many of the tools will let you export and dig deeper. Okay, now let's get into some smaller geographic units. We've done a couple of global studies, and you can use those links and dig deeper. But some of you know that the American Community Survey has been around for a while, introduced about 21 years ago, for detailed information that used to be on this long form. Some people used to get this short form. Some people used to get the long form that had more detailed data about, how do you commute to work and so on and so forth. And also, as I mentioned, we have a team of demographers who create detailed data on a variety of variables. We provide projections as well. So many of the tools that you'll see 2022, 2025, 2027 projections for small geographic areas. Where does all that come from, and can I trust it? There's a site that you can go to look at some external evaluations, if you really want to go there, of our estimates. And since these estimates for behavior and demographics are used by businesses to plan, very carefully plan where their locations should be, what their sales projections and growth strategies should be. That's all taken very seriously. And so fortunately, the estimates they stand up very well against other estimates. So there's independent studies that have shown that these estimates are actually quite good, quite rigorous. But the Living Atlas of the World, you can access that through all Esri products that I've got listed here. There's a guide for working with ACS data that is actually in the form of a story map, which I have a link to here. And then let's take a look at this as we navigate toward these smaller geographic areas. One of them is this, again, one of those approachable tools that you can use in the first 5 minutes of class or first 15 minutes of class, where you've got, okay, let's talk about the history of reapportionment. There's some data here, some videos, but I really like this one right here. So you go back to this created from the Census Bureau and looking at, okay, the change in seats. And that relates, of course, to changes in population. So you've got, okay, who gained and who lost for these years? Let's look at the 1940s. So this would be from the 30s. Wow. Fascinating to be able to do this. So some of these Great Plains states lost. Some of them continue to lose in terms of numbers of representatives because of population change. And then, of course, as the 20th century came to a close, you see California, Florida, and Texas gaining. And let's take a look at 2020. So being able to tie this to, okay, the reason why this changes is because population changes. So I think that's a good introductory tool to use that. The state counts for reapportionment is now in the Living Atlas of the World. That just came out about a month ago. So this is kind of new data here. State apportionment from the 2020 decennial came out about a month ago. Current ACS data, popular demographics, is a layer that uses this current ACS data. And let's dig into that right now. I've got the data inside ArcGIS Online. I've already just loaded it up from our Living Atlas of the World, the ACS popular demographics layer. And okay, I've got it in ArcGIS Online, and that means I can change style, right? I can again, we're going to teach a workshop on the new map viewer here. So if this looks a little bit unfamiliar, it's basically all that you had in the classic map viewer and then some. You've got additional capabilities. I'm going to search on median. I love looking at median age because it sparks so much conversation about what influences the median age: economics, retirements, movement, internal, external migration, et cetera. I'm going to add median age there, and I'm going to change the style so that I'm going to look at counts and amounts, color. I'm just going to classify the data, and I'm going to make it, how about, I'm going to leave it at natural breaks, but let's get a 5 category map. Okay, now I'm going to make sure that I'm actually doing that on county. So let's do the same thing, median age. I was doing it on state, and I want to do it on county. So, okay, counts and amounts, color. Great. And classified data, that's nice. Okay, let's get 5 classes, done. And I'm okay with that color ramp. Okay, super. Let's pop up a legend there. So now I've got this pattern of median age with the popular demographics layer that comes from the American Community Survey for different years. I'm looking at 2018 right now. But being able to do this and looking at these Great Plains counties being older than metro area counties in much of the country. And how can I see through there? Well, it's the standard, okay, styles, and I'm going to go down to properties here, and I'm going to say, I really want this to be a little bit transparent. So I can see, okay, there's Kansas City, there's Dallas, et cetera, Denver, all being a little bit younger for various reasons that we can discuss in class. So I've got this inside ArcGIS Online, part of the Living Atlas world. I can bring it into Pro for further analysis. Let me just have an instructional moment with you all. I have a lesson, you probably have a lesson, where the students go out to census.gov and they grab the Tiger Line files for counties, zip codes, census tracts, block groups, and then they go out and grab the demographic data, and then they join those things. And about 2 hours later, they can start doing analysis and mapping things and understanding patterns. I would just argue in this case, this is one of those perfect examples of, do you really need to have the students do that anymore? Certainly, joining is a valid and an important tool in geospatial analysis, right, folks? Nothing against that. You can join, though. In fact, Laura and I wrote this course where you actually go out to the Living Atlas of the world and you do an attribute join and a spatial join to the Living Atlas data. So you actually do it inside ArcGIS Online. So it accomplishes the mission of understanding the power that joins give you, but it doesn't go through that long workflow that we've all kind of gone through in the past. And it's hard to give up those lessons. It really is. But I would encourage you to think about, this is a perfect example of maybe that's time that you save and having the students go through that long process that they had to go through in the past, because that's the only way they could get the data in the past, is go to census.gov and download all this stuff. That they're freed to do other things that you want them to do that you perhaps in the past haven't had time to do. You've got 2 extra hours at least in your course or in your workshop. So this is absolutely fascinating to be able to do this. And just take a look at these this layer here. If I go to the county layer here, and I'm going to show the table, in just this one layer alone, and this is just county level, from the American Community Survey, I've got at least 100 variables. Not that more is always better, but I'm just pointing it out because there is truly a wealth. I wish I could get excited about this. Truly, folks, at your fingertips. And then the challenge as instructors, right, is, okay, what meets my educational goal for this lesson, for this course? What do I want the students to go into? What variables should they analyze? Or do I leave it a little bit open? Okay, let's look at some trends A and B. What variables influence those trends? What do you predict it's going to look like in the future for median age or anything else? And why do we care about median age in the first place? Well, put it in a scenario. I'm going to plan a service on the high Great Plains of the USA, and I have X budget, and I have X staff, and I have Y deadline. What 5 counties am I going to target that have the oldest median age, so I can target and address the needs of maybe a certain senior population? Fascinating. Yeah, Laura's got the story map link in there. Thanks. Okay. Time doesn't permit me to go into Pro right now. However, this is just an example of, oh my gosh, this is even more exciting than what we've just done so far. But as you probably are aware, in Pro, you've got a lot of other capabilities at your fingertips. Bivariate mapping, which you can do a little bit in ArcGIS Online. If you set up an expression in Arcade, you can accomplish some of the same things. But being able to do this kind of thing with this 3x3 little grid, as you can see on the legend on the left side, so it's I'm looking at household size and household income. Is there any relationship between the two? I just think that these capabilities allow for lots of deep, even intermediate dives, and even in a introductory geovisualization, cartography, GIS, data analytics course, having this, and okay, I'm going to map 2 fields. You know, we're not talking about learning this for 3 hours and then figuring out how to do it. It's fairly straightforward. And there's lots of help and tutorials to help you along the way, as well as actual real people. So that is a little bit of a couple of screenshots that I made with Pro. Urban Observatory. Let's take a look at this, because we've been looking at areas, and I think it's also, yes, absolutely. You've got some wildlife data, if that's what you're asking. Species counts, absolutely. Okay, I'm going to start comparing. This is a cities-focused activity and data set, and I think it's oftentimes where you might start, because oftentimes students are, okay, population, we're going to be looking at cities. Okay, fair enough. Now, Jack Dangerman and Richard Saul Wurman worked on this a couple years ago. Richard Saul Wurman, you may know, is the founder of the TED Talks. And so if I go to senior population, I've got about 60 variables on the left side, urban observatory, and I've got about 100 cities across the horizontal axis, if you will. And so I can say, you know what, I really want to look at Tokyo. Okay, I've got that already in the 3rd panel. What about Accra? What if I looked at Accra? I'm going to go to A here, and I'm going to look at Accra in Ghana. I want it in panel number 2. Okay, my hypothesis based on the population pyramids that we were looking at about 10 minutes ago is that Accra has a very young population. So the senior population at roughly the same scale in each one of these panels is going to be much less than Tokyo, and indeed it is. You can see the relationship between these two. Okay, so this could be a nice supplement to your area or other tool examination. Urban observatory, about 60 variables, about 100 cities. Land use, temperature, current traffic, lots of things you can explore here. Fascinating. And it's done with this interactive technology where you can, of course, you can set this up as an app on your own. You can have a 3-panel app. It's one of the apps that you can build inside ArcGIS Online. So that's what was done here. So I really love that. What about this one? What city is this? Here's a little quiz for you. Just make sure you folks are on your toes here in the last, we've got about 5 minutes left. What is this city? I see a spire there. I can see some pretty cool vegetation. I'm up on a promontory, so it's not a flat city. Keep thinking, keep thinking. You folks are on the right path. They're on the right ocean. All right, we better move on. Keep thinking. On the point that I raised earlier, Auckland. Yes, exactly right, Jess. I was there 2 years ago. Good on you. Where will you find the data? How do you know if it's any good? And what about societal issues? I have a book in Esri Press that I co-wrote with Jill Clark. And the book is all about, I know it sounds really boring, but public domain spatial data. Ooh, but really it's fascinating because it gets into the key issues about analyzing data and assessing data. But inside there, we have short digestible essays. For example, this one on be critical of and aware of default settings in GIS software that actually John Nelson at Esri helped me with. Faked satellite imagery. What's not intriguing about that? If you introduce that to your students, why would anyone do that? Be critical of the imagery as well as the vector data. So spatial reserves is where to find data, how do I know if it's any good, and how do I talk to my students about location, privacy, copyright, and all those societal issues. But that is oftentimes where I send people if they say, where do I find data on what? So I've got top 10 satellite image, top 10 Landsat sites, the top 10 ArcGIS hubs for data utility. Admittedly, some of it's subjective based on my own areas of interest, but I hope that's useful. Also, when we think about other issues that we could wrap inside population in our remaining minutes, policy maps. In policy maps, which I have an essay on in the Esri Community Zone, our education blog, is you generate quickly 5 maps of your own choice. You can save those, you can share those, but it is about all kinds of social and racial, economic, and other variables that you can start analyzing and drill down using some of the census data that we're talking about today. So policy maps is a very accessible and interesting and intriguing way of getting your students to think spatially and using geospatial analysis. And I even say this to, you're teaching economics, you're teaching a non-GIS course. Some of these tools that we're talking about today are useful for those courses. Others of these that we talked about are actually quite suitable for GIS data science courses. There is also, on a related note, a hub, an ArcGIS hub on GIS for racial equity that, again, uses a lot of the data sets that we've talked about here. There's no shortage of story maps for population studies. One of my favorites is the 7 billion story map. It's 10 years old now. So where are we now compared to 7 billion? Are we 7.4 or 7.5? But when the 7 billion mark came, there was an intriguing story map that came out, and it's been updated since then. Population change is another good story map that I find useful. And again, related to changes in population and related changes in the social and economic awareness and issues confronting societies around the world. There are some intriguing story maps, one on Charlotte's inequality over time, Charlotte, North Carolina, the life of Dolores Huerta, about the labor movement from the 1930s to really the present time. Good resources there, fascinating. And I think one of the key messages here is that these tools can be consumed, right? Story maps, for example, dashboards, et cetera. And you have the capability at your own fingertips to create your own. And so do your students. It's not just consume things that others have created, but create your own on issues, on variables, on places, neighborhoods, et cetera, that you care about, that your students care about. That's what's powerful about all this. All right, I've really literally run out of time here, but places and regions, so population versus ecoregions, related to COVID, what are the trends? Lastly, I promise to end with this. I love these. Out in migration, 2 counties and 2 states. So our colleague Jennifer Bell actually created these. She's on the Story Maps team now. And incoming and outgoing for states and for counties. And the symbology used in here is just absolutely fascinating with the dark background. But let's just take a look at, I've got a colleague in Idaho that's actually on the webinar right now. So if we open this up in the map viewer, being able to look at incoming and outgoing. Remember we looked at that for countries with that 3D globe, part of the Cool Maps gallery about a half an hour ago. Well, this lets you do that by state and county for not every single county. There's about 50 counties, but every state in the US, and looking at incoming and outgoing migration. And of course, now that we're coming to the end of the workshop, we're having some bandwidth issues. So we might come back to that, but you can see a little thumbnail there. It almost looks like, to me, like electromagnetic, sparks. Fascinating. There's some population data tied to lessons that we can go into, for example, on the Dust Bowl, and I've got a little bit about spatial analysis and dashboards here at the end. To learn more, no shortage there. Take a look at this story map. Bill, I don't take down any of my story maps. I've got story maps from, for 11 years out there now. And I always think, just like you probably as educators, I'll probably use pieces of that someday. I really don't want to delete them. Okay, occasionally I have something that's incredibly dated that is no longer really relevant, or it's using some old technology that doesn't work very well. I've got a broken link. So I do, I correct myself. I do take that down. But anyway, be curious, model. Yes.
I'm going to have to cut you off there.
I know, sadly. Okay, so here's the goal. And if Brian, Laura, or I can be of assistance to you in the future, that's what we're here for. And we're all about building a more sustainable, healthier, happier future. Thanks, folks, for being here. Much appreciated.